Hello and welcome to Crucible of Words for yet more dedicated legacy action. Today I'm playing a request deck from one of my subscribers, and this deck is Reanimator. So this is sort of one of the main combo decks of the format. It's kind of fallen on the wayside a little bit recently, but as you can imagine, the game plan is relatively simple. We are trying to put one of these creatures, usually Griselbrand, into play, but sometimes Archon of Cruelty and sometimes Serra's Emissary. We're trying to put those into play on turn 1 or 2, and then use them to just put the game away in a turn or 2. The way we're doing this is Entombs, to go and find them and put them in our graveyard. Faithless Looting, to take them from our hands into our graveyards. Thoughtseize, which can target ourselves. And Unmask, which can target ourselves. And these things are going to put these into our graveyard, and then we're going to reanimate them with Exhume, Reanimate, and Animate Dead. And that's about it, really. And hopefully we're going to put a load of Griselbrands in and draw a whole bunch of cards. Now, to facilitate this plan, we've got some fast mana in the form of Lotus Petals and Dark Rituals, so we can do some pretty busted turn 1 plays. Then we've also got our suite of discard in terms of Grief, which is a thing that we can use to discard with our opponent and then reanimate it and just double hit our opponent's hand on turn 1, which can sometimes be good enough. The Unmask, which when we're not pointing at ourselves, can point at our opponent and clear the way for our things. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's quite a straightforward deck, but there's a few little sort of lines in it, especially when you get to the sideboard. Now, if you notice our mana base, it's got these 2 swamps, but we've also got this underground sea here, as well as our Badlands. So obviously the Badlands make sense for the Faithless Looting and stuff, but the underground sea is very important when we look at the sideboard. So we have these 3 copies of Show and Tell. This is our sort of way of cheating around artifact graveyard hate most easily. So we're pretty much boarding this in just about every matchup, I think. And this just gives us another way of putting one of these into play. Now, there will be some matchups where our opponents could have Emeralds and things where we're not going to be boarding these in. But for the most part, if we're expecting anyone to bring a graveyard hate, we're probably going to want these Show and Tells. We've got a few other tools in the sideboard to deal with the hate that's going to be brought in against us. So we have these Serenities, which can blow up all the artifact and enchantment hate we need. Wear Tears, which does a similar thing, so we've just got multiple effects of that. We've got one Iona, which is just a different reanimation target against mono-coloured decks, basically. So mono-white initiative, we can just stop them being able to remove our guys if we put an Emeria into play, and they also can't play any guys of their own. It should be pretty rudimentary to win from that point. Then we've got Dismember, which can hit things like Containment Priest being one of the big ones. Now, hopefully we can discard that before it happens, but this is a thing we can use for that. It can also hit Scavenging Ooze, which you see a lot less frequently these days. This is just going to be a thing that we're bringing in various situations. Then we have these 2 Silences and these 2 Chancellor of the Annex. Now these are less about protecting what we're doing and hating on the people that can do something just as broken just as quickly. So this is going to be useful for things like Storm and lots of decks that have got really outrageous turn 1 plays, so oops all spells, etc. So that's what we're going to be boarding these in. And the Silences can do a similar thing. They can break up a Storm chain, so you wait for them to do one of their like tutor effects, whether it's Burning Wish or Wishful Talisman, and then with that on the stack you can cast a Silence and just stop them being able to cast that big Storm spell that's going to finish you off. It can also just buy you turns against other decks necessarily, depending on what the situation looks like. So this is more or less it. This is a pretty stock deck list today. I normally like to play around with a little bit of fruity stuff, but I had a request and I'm nothing if not compliant to people asking politely. And I haven't played this deck on my channel yet, so people who've been watching it and want to get a good idea of decks that are around in Legacy, this is one that a lot of people pick up when they first get into Legacy and then put down after they've been in Legacy for a little while, because the play patterns are relatively repetitive and you don't get the most wiggle room to sort of play the deck your way and do things like that. So it doesn't appeal to that many people when you see the decks that are also in the format. But it's quite powerful, and sometimes you just want to slap some big creatures into play and draw 14 cards on turn 1. So yeah, that's about it. So before we jump into a league with this, let me just say, likes, subscribe, comments, these will help me out, especially subscribers, because if I hit a certain number, then I can start getting paid for doing this, and that would be lovely. Anyway, so do those things, help me out. Let's jump into a league with Red-Black Reanimator. So we're on the draw for round 1. Now this hand can definitely put some fatties into our graveyard, but we don't actually have a way of reanimating them here. Now we might be able to draw until we would have 3 draws, but I think we can just do better because we can mulligan quite deep and it not really impact it, because we only need a very few amount of resources to really do our thing. So we're going to mulligan this one. So what does this one do? This is a turn 1 Serra's Emissary if we want to Thoughtseize ourselves with the Dark Ritual. So I think we can keep this, and we're probably putting back one of our lands, I think, here. because if we draw a black card, then we can grief to make sure the way's clear and also know what the best Semmer's Emissary target's going to be. So I think we just put back our Marsh Flats here and say done. Let's see what our opponent does to us. A Savannah. Okay. A Green Sun Zenith. Right. I'd very much like to draw. So this could be like Maverick. It could be Green White Depths. There's quite a few options it could be. So I would like to draw a black card. Okay. So now we should be able to win the game this turn. We're going to draw a load of cards. So we're going to start off with a Scrubland. We're going to cast Dark Ritual. We're going to cast Thoughtseize, targeting us. We're going to put this Griselbrand into the graveyard. And then we're going to Exhume it. Then we're going to draw some cards. They should allow us to grief our opponent. And we can get rid of one of these reanimates. Let's see what our opponent's working with. White Plume Adventurer, Soul Guide Lantern, Punishing Fire. None of these are looking particularly scary to me. I guess Soul Guide Lantern gives them another redraw, which is probably the scariest thing they can do. Sure, we'll take that one. Now, we could draw another 7 cards here. 1, 2, 3, 4. But I don't think we need to do that just yet. If our opponent goes to kill our creature in some way, we can draw another 7 cards, and we'll definitely be able to put a creature into play off of that, I would imagine. It's very unlikely that we would fail. Our opponent's probably dead. So there's a Tiger. Let's see what we have here. A Bloodstained Mire. So we can do Faithless Looting if we want to. I think that we should just attack first and get a bunch of cards off of the Griselbrand. Swords to Plowshares. Okay, we will draw 7 cards. Pretty good top deck from our opponent, but it shouldn't matter because we've drawn so many cards. Alrighty then. In the main phase, and we've got some plays here. So we're probably looking at, first up, Dark Ritual. Then, how many creatures can we reanimate this turn? We can Exhume first, get back our grief. Oh wait, we need to hold priority here. Yeah, so get back our grief here. Made a slight error there. Okay, so we're getting a Punishing Fire on our guy. It's fine. Let's take their White Plume. And we will Entomb. Go and get ourselves this Archon of Cruelty. There's a slight misstep on my end there. We will cast this, targeting our Archon of Cruelty for black. This will get rid of their Dryad Arbor. Okay, they're just going to scoop. So where we did the Exhume there for the grief, what we should have done is we should have either cast a Faithless Looting or the Entomb first to get the better creature in. That was a slight misstep. But oh, sorry. Let's carry on. So our opponent is Maverick Initiative. So I think we're going to want these Serentells. And we're probably going to want these Dismembers and maybe some amount of this sort of stuff as well. So it's a little bit difficult to know exactly what we want here. Now, the Iona on white is going to be better than the Semmer's Emissary. So we'll board that in. Now, Caracas is one of the few things that can interrupt with this rather than the other bits and pieces. So that's something to keep an eye on. White-green, what are the hate cards? We're looking at things like Urza Saga targets. So things like Serenity can clean those up, as can these Wear Tears. So I think we're probably looking at some amount of these. So what we have less need to discard from our opponent's hand. So it's probably the griefs we're cutting down on here. Is that right? So we trim griefs, that gets us 4 show and tells and a Serenity. And if we want to board any more deeply, because obviously these don't enable what we're the griefs don't enable us because they don't hit our own hand. So that's why. So we want to keep Faithless Looting so we can dig for our sideboard cards. We need to keep our fast mana, I think, here. The Exhume probably isn't one we can necessarily cut. I think we do need another Serenity or Wear Tear effect in. Probably trimming an Animate Dead and maybe an Unmask. That gets us a Serenity and a Wear Tear. So with a black source, actually no, we don't even need a black source, we can just pitch it. So we can make a turn 1 Archon of Cruelty, which is fine. I think we can keep this. Okay, so we have a Wear Tear as well. So we don't actually have to go straight away here. We can just float out this Marsh Flats first and try and get the value with the Archon of Cruelty. The only way we can get punished here is if our opponent has the Containment Priest. Like, I don't think the Archon of Cruelty on its own, in the face of potential Sword to Plowshare that's coming from our opponent, is good enough. I think we're supposed to wait a turn and try and use it as a removal spell. That could be wrong. Okay, so they've got to play. Let's see what this is. An Outland Liberator. Sure. So this can blow up our Animate Deads, but we're not really worried about that. So the other thing to play against now is the Endurance. I don't think we can play around Endurance, although we don't have a very long clock, a very fast clock from our opponent, so maybe we don't have to play around. We can try and draw an additional discard spell. That seems like it's going to take a little while to happen. I don't feel in a great spot, if I'm being honest here. We have to 2-for-1 ourselves to discard the Archon of Cruelty. So we have 3, 4, 5 mana. So we're still a long ways off of trying to hardcast this guy. Is it worth holding on? Because we basically have 0 resources in the tank if we do this. And if they do have the endurance, I guess they lose 2 cards out of it. So it's not the end of the world. So I guess we play this out. We unmask, targeting us. We will exile this Dark Ritual. So they're going to know our entire hand and what to play around with now. So this is the endurance that they can slam down on us. Yeah, so there it is. That was one of the things I was worried about. So this just fizzles, so we don't have a target. So now we are looking at trying to draw into something that does something. So we are behind now. So it's just going to clock us for 2. It's not too bad. We've got a reasonable amount of life to use as a resource here. So they've shown us a Knight of the Reliquary, which makes you think more towards... It must be Maverick, looking at the way it's constructed so far, actually. So we need to find a creature or an Entomb and a Reanimate spell. So we're not doing anything. We need 2 more draws. Now, if we draw a Faithless Looting, that can do both halves of what we need. Okay, a Caracas. That makes our Griselbrand into just a draw engine rather than a effective spell. Okay, so we have a Thoughtseize. That's one of our things of getting a creature into the graveyard. So we can't actually cast this to try and mess with our opponent's hand. Yeah, so we just get clonked for another 3 here. We can play out 2 Lotus Petals to flip this, but I don't think that's really worth doing. Okay, so we just need a reanimation spell now, and we can get the Archon of Cruelty into play. We have 5 mana, so if we draw Dark Ritual into Dark Ritual, we can actually just cast this Archon of Cruelty, or even land into Dark Ritual, I think does it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, so land into Dark Ritual, we can cast it. Alternatively, any reanimation spell, we can Thoughtseize ourselves, put the Archon in, and try and get going that way. So they're just getting the Dried Arbor just as a creature that they can sacrifice, as well as a thing that baps us for damage. Now we'll have to take damage off our fetch lands to do anything, potentially, depending on if we want to use these Lotus Petals. So we may have to do a calculation of damage versus the usefulness of having these Lotus Petals. Faithless Looting. Okay, so are we using a Lotus Petal for this to save us life? I think we are. Let's see what we find. Okay, this is a pretty good one. So I think we're getting rid of these 2, and then we play this out. We're going to Thoughtseize our opponent first to make sure they don't have anything scary to put in. Green Sun Zenith, 2 Endurances. Endurances aren't an issue here. The Green Sun Zenith might be, so I think we take the Green Sun here. They do just get to put an Endurance in for free, so we could take the Endurance here, but I'm not a big fan of seeing what they can find off of the Green Sun Zenith. So they get both of their Endurances in, so that's 6. So they got 9 power of attackers coming in. But we will have the Archon of Cruelty doing its thing. So we'll crack this, and we'll get an Underground Sea. Crack this. What does it matter here? I think Badlands is fine here. Means we can cast the Faithless Looting if we need to. So here is the Show and Tell plan coming in nice. Our opponent's got all these Endurances in hand. They do get one of them, but we get to kill their Dryad Arbor here. We also draw a card and gain 3, which is relevant. So they're shuffling in our Faithless Looting, which is fine. Hopefully this Archon of Cruelty can just do its thing and get us over the finish line. So they can play a second Endurance and then use that to double block our Archon of Cruelty. The Frenzied Trap Breaker, whatever this is, should flip back. Yeah, there we go. So it's less of a clock. We are in a weird situation here because the second Endurance does mean that they can kill our Archon of Cruelty and be left with an Endurance in play. So we might need to find more. So they can't attack into us at least. So we're kind of they are attacking into us. That seems like a very bold play to me. Why would they have done this? Have a Lightning Bolt seems very unlikely. Minsk and Boo to sacrifice to try and deal me more damage. It seems weird considering we know they have an Endurance in hand. Like, we're definitely blocking. The question is which one we block. If we block this one, we take 3 damage. So Minsk and Boo can't kill us this turn. But then we die on the next turn. Will they have a Lightning Bolt in their deck post-board? That's very hard to say. It's very suspicious behaviour. Like, the correct play is to block the Endurance most of the time. I'm just trying to think what they could be playing us into here. Is there a way they can deal 4 damage to us easily here? I don't think so. Minsk and Boo deals 3, which then finish off our... which won't finish off our Archon of Cruelty if we block. I think we block here just to play around potential Lightning Bolt. See if we played into something horrible. Shadow Spear. Okay. Interesting. This is an interesting line that we could do. We can bring back our Outland Liberator here. and then blow up their Shadow Spear with it. But we get to eat one of their creatures here. So they're going to put in an Endurance here. Sure. And who are they going to target? They should target themselves. They are not targeting themselves. Interesting. Okay. So this only takes up to 7 life. Another Archon of Cruelty. I assume they're not blocking here, because that's just throwing a guy under the bus for no reason. Okay, so in our second main phase, we will reanimate their Outland Liberator with the purposes of blowing up. So we'll block here, and then we'll blow up the Shadow Spear so that they don't trample through. We're probably going to keep this Marsh Flats in hand so that we can pitch it to Faithless Looting if needs be. That's our blocker. We would like to destroy this, please. I don't like the way my opponents played this game. I think they should have just had 2 Endurances back on blocks. Okay, so there's one of these Faithless Lootings that we've been looking for. Let's see what we can find. A Reanimate and an Unmask. I guess we're probably looking at putting these 2 away. They're paying costs. So we've got a Swords to Plowshares on our Archon of Cruelty. Okay, so we get to reanimate the other one and kill their blocker. Kill their guy, sorry. So this goes for our Archon. It's going to hit us for 8, but then we're going to blow them up. Okay, looks like we've got the GGs from the opponent. Can't cast these anyway. So our opponent's got 1 draw to find Swords to Plowshares. Soul Guide Lantern, a little bit too late. Well, they have 1 draw off of this, so should let them take the draw and then give them the GGs. So yeah, I think our opponent could have played that better if they had just had 2 Endurances in play to block this when it attacks, so they can sacrifice the Dryad Arbor when I attack. The Outland Liberator, so they had a spare guy that they could sacrifice and still hold up 6 power of blocks, which makes it very difficult for me to attack my Archon of Cruelty, because if this dies and they're left with a 3/4, they can beat me down quite quickly. So I think that was a little bit of an error. And also, when they played the other Endurance, they should have hit their own graveyard, because that gave me an out against their Shadow Spear line as well. So even though, you know, people think Reanimator is purely straightforward, there was definitely some different lines our opponents could have taken that could have hurt us. All right, so we are 1-0. Let's go into round 2. So our hand makes a turn 2 Griselbrand with Unmasked backup. So I think we should be keeping this. We're on the draw, so we can get hit by a Thoughtseize, which can disrupt us a fair bit. But there's not too many Thoughtseize around in the meta right now. Oh, okay. They're just doing to us what we were going to do to them. This might be a mirror match. So they can hit our Archon of Cruelty, and then they can reanimate it if they really want. They're probably going to take the Exhume here. Exhume is going to be very difficult for us to cast in the face of Reanimate Mirror, though. We'll see. This could be like a scam deck, but they probably would have played their land first if it was. Okay, this feels like our opponent is about to reanimate our own guy. Not really where we wanted to be, unfortunately. Okay, so we have to discard a card here. So I suppose we discard the Unmask. So we get to break parity here, in theory. Depends if our opponent's got any more juice left in the tank here. Because we can Entomb at end step and get ourselves an Archon of Cruelty. And then we can Exhume the Archon of Cruelty and get our opponents. So it will kill this. So we're going to take 9 this turn, 10 off of this. And we're going to be at 7, but we should be able to blow up our opponent's Archon of Cruelty as long as they don't have additional follow-up. If they do, then I think we just... And that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. I guess we probably discard a land here in case we draw a black card and want to unmask our opponent first. Let's see how bad this is. So this is one of those hands where if we were on the play, I think we are quite far ahead here. But because we're on the draw, we might lose this one. Unsurprising for a mirror match, really. Okay, so they're casting Thoughteize on us, which is not ideal. So we have to crack our Entomb here, because if our opponent is going to take the Exhume or whatever, they'll take 1/2 of our things, so we're going to be in trouble either way. At least this way, it means that we might be able to draw a reanimation spell next turn. Like, we're almost certainly losing this game because we lost the die roll. So they're going to take our Exhume here, and then we have to top deck a reanimation spell. Now, our opponent could just reanimate this Archon of Cruelty because they have the life to do it if they have a reanimate, but those are the risks you take sometimes. So we are just dead on board, so we can see this game. All right, need to get better at winning die rolls. So these show and tells feel pretty bad here. This Iona on black is going to be good. We don't have any of the graveyard hate that you would sometimes expect or want to have. So these silences and these chancellors are other options we have. So is the Iona is probably going to be better than a Seren's Emissary here, I would say, because we just named black on that, and then our opponent is unlikely to be able to deal with what we've got going on. I don't think we need to worry about any of the other creatures. These are all fine. I don't know if we want these, so we can play Silence as a Time Warp, but in order to do so, we're going to have to trim something else that's probably going to be better anyway. So I think we just have to... Like, we're just going to win game 2 and then lose game 3. That's almost certainly what's going to happen here. I don't really think there's much we can do about this. But let's see what we open. Okay, so this is not a keepable hand because we have no mana sources. So this is an Unmask Entomb hand. But we don't have any way of bringing our creature back. So I don't think we can keep this one either. So we might even lose game 2 if we're going to mulligan super hard. But again, if we find one of the sort of famous Dark Ritual Entomb Reanimate spell hands, then we're just golden. Because our opponent doesn't really get to interact with us on turn 0. Reanimator decks I haven't seen play Leyline for a long time. Let's mulligan this one, see what we're looking at here. Yikes. So this is a pretty bad 5. We can Thoughtseize our opponent. We can Faithless Looting and hope to find something. Or we can just mulligan to 4. I think we should just mulligan here. This is a turn 1 grief. So we get to discard 2 cards from their hands here. So we're going to keep our black cards and our grief and our reanimate. And then we just need a mana source. So probably just keeping the Badlands here. So you got to put these away. So we might just be able to do the same thing that our opponent did to us, where we can grief away like a really powerful creature. So we'll cast this for free, exile this, and we want to put the evoke trigger on the bottom so that we can see what they're working with and see if we need to discard something to mess with this. So Fairy Macabre, Entomb, Animate Dead. Okay, so we're probably taking the Fairy. So because we've stacked it this way, we're in an okay spot. So we take out the Fairy Macabre here. And then this dies. We play this. Then we reanimate our grief, not the Fairy Macabre. And then we get to see our opponent's hand again. So you got 2 lands, Wear Tear, Animate Dead, Entomb. So Entomb does give them access to things here. I think we're supposed to take the Entomb because it's harder for them to get creatures in their graveyard. Yeah, I think we take the Entomb. So we leave them with these 2, Wear Tear and Animate Dead. So we have no more resources left. But we might just be able to beat our opponent down with this grief. There's a Badlands. Back to us. An Unmask. So that might come in handy later. Bashing up for 3. We just need to do this for 7 turns. Easier said than done. But what it does do... Okay, so they found the Entomb and they've got the Animate Dead here. So we are just dead here. I think we can just scoop this one up. Yeah. Serra's Emissary. Okay. We might not be totally dead. If that was a Griselbrand, that'd be a lot better, in my opinion. This is just gonna... This gives them protection from creatures, but that's gonna stop us beating down with our little grief. But it's not gonna stop us if we can string together some sort of other play. So there's the Animate Dead, go on and Scrubland. So if we can string together a Reanimate on an Archon of Cruelty, then I think we can still win this game. We don't have a lot of turns to do that. And the actual Reanimate line itself is falling apart very quickly here because obviously we need life to reanimate. But we can still get there. Exhume. That's not great because this grief doesn't really do anything. So, like we can't cast it anyway. So we're going to need Faithless Looting, I think, is what we need. So we need like Faithless Looting into like Lotus Petal, land, creature. No, I don't think we can do this at all actually. Let's see. Nope, I think we're just dead. Fair enough. We lost to the mirror, so this game was brought to you by losing the die roll and mulliganing to 4. I think we gave a reasonable go. Like if we hit the Animate Dead there, then they just need to find a reanimation spell, and there's many more reanimation spells in their deck than there are ways of putting creatures in their graveyard. Because there's 4 Entomb, and then they have to discard from their hand, which requires multiple resources to do often. So I think it was right to take the Entomb, but can't win them all, and losing to mirror, you know, it's a bit of a coin flip anyway. So let's go on to round 3. We are still yet to win a die roll. This hand makes a turn 2 Griselbrand or a turn 1 Griselbrand if we draw a black card. So I am down to clown with this. We will keep a basic island from our opponent. So we're probably going to want to clear the way with some sort of unmask effect first. Personal tutor. Okay, so this is Doomsday. All right. So they're going to put Doomsday on top of their library. All right, we need to get a little bit of a wiggle on. This Thoughtseize is good. So we're going to play out our Swamp first. And then I think we Thoughtseize our opponent. Then we unmask ourselves. Then we reanimate the Griselbrand. Sure. So let's try this one out. They might counterspell this, which would be a smart thing to do. Okay, they let it go. Let's cast this Thoughtseize tagging our opponent and see what they're working with. Okay, the Force of Will, pitching another personal tutor. So our opponent has 3 cards in hand. So I have to imagine it's mana source and a dark ritual in there. So I don't think we have to worry about reanimation spell, about counter spells here. Now we can't actually unmask ourselves the way we've played this one out, can we? We have to wait another turn to do that. But that's fine, I guess. Like, we could unmask them again, but I don't necessarily think our opponent can win the game next turn. I think their plan is to cast the Doomsday next turn off of the Dark Ritual mana source in their hand, which I think means we have a relatively clear run next turn, so we can try and pick apart their hand a little bit. Cabal Ritual. Okay, so there's the mana source and the Ritual, and there's the Doomsday. Sure. So we kind of knew what our opponent's hand was, and we're going to let them resolve their pile. Okay, our opponent's finished selecting their cards, so they're on the Grief build. So how many Street Wraiths? We've got 1 Street Wraith, 2 Street Wraiths, and what else we got here? So 2 Edge of Autumn. So they can't have it full of cyclers. So it looks like they're doing a pass the turn twice pile, perhaps, which I think we can beat. So let's see if we can beat that or not. A Badlands. Okay. So I think we are just playing this one out and casting a Faithless Looting. So we'll be getting rid of this Griselbrand, and we'll probably be getting rid of the... It doesn't really matter which of these go because the other one's just getting pitched to unmask anyway. So we may as well just pitch. So then we will unmask our opponent. This is to play around a daze. It's a Brainstorm. Okay. So our opponent is trying to win the game with a Brainstorm next turn, but they will not be able to do that now. So the Brainstorm basically can just give you a pile that does it all, really. So let's have a look. 7 cards. Can we put another threat into play so we can kill them next turn? We don't have any starting mana here. So we can't... We can kill them next turn because we can put an Archon of Cruelty into play next turn. So that's fine. And we just pitch this Archon of Cruelty. So our opponent has to try and win on 1 turn when they've got 4 or 5... Was it 4 cyclers? 1... I don't think they have enough cyclers to win the game this turn. Now, I could be wrong on that. I consider. Okay. So they need an additional mana, and they need the Thassa's Oracle. So I don't think they win this turn. Lion's Eye Diamond, sure. So we have this one, I believe. Oh, they got a Deep Analysis, actually, haven't they? Oh, okay, no. We are dead to the Deep Analysis pile. Sure. Yeah. And they cast the Oracle. So what we could have done is we could have, on the first turn, we could have unmarked pitching one of our important black spells. The only problem with doing that is we'll both be like there with 0 resources, but our opponent is a blue deck with a load of cantrips in. So that situation doesn't benefit us. And we couldn't just go for it because they did have the Force of Will. We had to peak first. So a little bit awkward, but they did have the turn 2 Doomsday. So it's a pretty tricky one there. So these Show and Tells are going to be good against Graveyard Hate. I'm trying to think what Graveyard Hate our opponent might have. I'd say Chancellors here are pretty decent, and the Iona is pretty decent too. The Silence, also decent if we're trying to stop our opponent, but I think our plan is going to be discard for game 1 at least. Maybe discard plus Chancellor, or these things. This Emissary isn't as good as the Iona, and if we want these 2 chances and these Show and Tells, we're going to have to figure out how to stick them in. We kind of don't want to get rid of any of our core engine, really. So we're probably looking at trimming just a few little bits here and there. So like the Unmask. So we can trim the Unmask. You can probably... the Animate Dead or the Exhume worse? Probably the Animate Dead. Or if they're playing Flusterstorm, the Exhume is worse. Okay. So we're probably looking at something like this, because the Show and Tells kind of replace the Exhumes a little bit. Or we could keep 1 Exhume and bin 1 Unmask. But I think, no, we want to keep the Unmask in because we want to be able to mess with our opponent's hand. Sure, so this is what we're going with. I'd like to go first. This lets me grief my opponent twice on turn 1, but then I have no resources. Yikes. Maybe we're Faithless Looting Thoughtseize on turn 1. Yeah, go on then. I'm going to give this a whirl. It's a bit of an odd one. It's a little bit all in, but this matchup is usually decided within the first 2 turns of the game. So I think having a really explosive couple of turns is going to be... A really explosive turn 1 is going to be where I want to be. Okay, so we have a Leyline of the Void. So that's a little bit awkward for us. I think we are on the Lotus Petal. Crack this for red. We're still going to Faithless Looting. Didn't find the land that we were hoping for, which is a bit of a problem. So probably pitching... We need to keep this, I think. So we're probably getting rid of this Chancellor and maybe this Grief. And we can hold back the Archon. I think we want to keep 1 thing for Show and Tell. Although these Griefs could be threats that we might be able to cast down the line. This is quite a tricky decision point, I think. I guess the Animate Dead is the one to go there. And then play this out. We'll Thoughtseize our opponent and see how we go. We could have saved that in case we do another Faithless Looting maybe. That would have been a better one. Okay, so what do we got here? Force of Will, Brainstorm, Brainstorm, Edge of Autumn. So I think we're taking the Brainstorm here. I guess we're taking the other Brainstorm. Yeah, I don't fancy our chances here. The ley line was a little bit awkward, truth be told. So we take both of our opponent's Brainstorm. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 cards. Not a great turn for us, but should hopefully set our opponent back a little bit. But again, as I mentioned before, they are the deck with the cantrips and stuff. Interesting they cracked that now. Like, they're always going to be getting the Underground Sea with this, but the reason I think this is interesting, because if they draw more lands and then some sort of spell, they can have it, and they can like have a Brainstorm fetch land going off, or a Ponder fetch land. Now the reason they've done it is because they want to be able to cast a Force of Will and pay, but you could just wait until the spell is on the stack and then crack your fetch land, so I think that's probably a slightly tighter bit of play they can do there that gives them a small percentage chance of doing something. Okay, so if we can draw the right things, we might be able to put a Grief into play and beat down with it. Now, our opponent probably doesn't have any removal in their deck, because their idea is to stop our creatures getting into play in the first place, but I'm not feeling very confident about this match. Right, Doomsday is a deck that can race Reanimator pretty well as being a deck that has the ability to do its combo, and as soon as you cast that Doomsday, your opponent can't really interact with it, unless they can kill you, for the most part. Like when we're like this, because all our discard doesn't do anything, because they stack their deck around it, so they can just play around discard like they did in the previous game. Okay, so they found a second land. I think the last video I watched of someone playing Doomsday, they had 1 ley line in their board. Interesting. I suspect they sort of hover between the 1 and 3 mark. Okay, so we can cast a Grief at some point, but only for the effect, not for the creature. So we're going to need a little bit of help from the top of our deck. Mystery Emperor. So our opponent has successfully managed to find 3 lands so they can cast any Doomsdays they draw. Now, they'll have to pay 4 because there's still a Chancellor trigger, Chancellor ability in there. So they're going to pay and then put the Doomsday on top of their library. And then they're going to kill us next turn because they have the Edge of Autumn so they can get into their pile. And they also already have the Thassa's Oracle, so they can just stack it with Cyclers. So we are dead on our next turn, and I don't know if there's much we can do about that in the face of Force of Will. Like, we have to cast this, I think, and we might as well just pitch one of these. This is probably getting Force of Willed, but it might not get. We have lost this game at this point. So if we take the Edge of Autumn, this can buy us a turn. It turns our opponent's combo. And then I'm not really sure what we're trying to draw into to win the next turn. So we kept a hand that was pretty decent, apart from it was pretty like explosive and did a lot of stuff, unless our opponent had a Lay Down in the Void. So we could have griefed them and then Faithless Looting. We could have griefed them and then managed to get our stuff going. But okay, so it's Doomsday coming in this turn. I think we might as well just concede, to be honest. I don't really know what we can draw here. Save our opponent spending the time making the pile. Alright, so we lost that one. I think that matchup is probably, again, relatively play-draw dependent. Because I had no option of interfering with our opponent's plays there, really, in the first game. So it was a little bit unfortunate. We could have looked for a hand that was more resilient to ley line. Like one of our show and tell hands, we could have gone for that. Or have a more stable mana base. I kept a hand that would be alright against Force of Will, but not very good against ley line, and we got hit by the ley line, so maybe not ideal. So you could probably replay that decision in your head numerous times. Anyway, let's go on to the 4th round, I think it is. Okay, we lost the die roll again, and we've got a hand that doesn't really do anything, so we're going to mulligan this. This is a weird one. Like, we can Entomb for a guy, and we can Faithless Looting to try and find a reanimation spell. And we get 1 additional draw because we're on the draw. The Entomb is the hard part to find usually. So I think we keep this one and we probably sling back a Petal. Not a big fan of this hand, but also I think it's fine. It's a weird one. It's a sort of one that you don't necessarily mind your opponents having when you're playing against Reanimator. But we're just getting Doomsdayed again. Okay, so they're going to take out our Entomb here. So now we are in more trouble. They could take our Faithless Looting, but that seems a bit loose to me. I think they probably want to do that. So this is probably looking like Doomsday as well. Underground Sea Thoughtseize is more of a Doomsday start, so it might be a bit knackered here again. Once again, losing the die roll here is pretty big in these sorts of matchups. Yep, so there goes our Entomb. Sure. Let's see what we find. Oh, Griselbrand. Okay, so I think we are playing this out. Gonna get ourselves a Badlands, and we will try out this Faithless Looting. Opponent's Force of Willing, our Faithless Looting. Pitching Uro. Okay, so we're on some sort of bug pile. Okay, this is different to what I thought we were looking at. Sure. So I don't think we need to be unmasking our opponent for Doomsdays or anything. Right? Our opponent is sort of like a Team America control-y style deck. So we've got ourselves an Entomb, and we've got ourselves a Faithless Looting. Interesting. Do I want to play around Days is the question. If I want to play around Days, this is an Entomb turn. If we want to play around Force of Will, this is... If we don't want to play around Days, this is a Faithless Looting turn. Interesting. I think I'm going to try out the... It looks like we've got the time, so I'm going to try out the Entomb line in our opponent's turn. And this will also be a pretty good pro for counter spells. Okay, Savannah. So we are 4-colour stuff. 4-colour Uro. Grist. Sure. Don't care too much about that. It can blow up our creature, but if our creature gets into play, it shouldn't matter. Right, let's cast this Entomb. So I kind of want to get an Archon of Cruelty because we're going to put this Griselbrand in the bin anyway. And this just gives us 2 options. Let's go for that. Another Griselbrand. Okay, so let's cast this Faithless Looting. Jeez, these are not the cards we were looking for, truth be told. So I guess we're pitching these 2. And then we can unmask our opponent this turn. Pitching our Thoughtseize, but I don't really know how good that's going to be for us. I think we could have kept the Dark Ritual to play for a... okay, so we just have a Force of Will here. Sure, so we'll just take the Force. So we could have kept the Dark Ritual for the purposes of hard casting a Grief if we draw it. But I think having a Thoughtseize to follow up against a deck that is obviously trying to leverage a lot of card advantage in the mid to late game feels like having a Thoughtseize to punch through one of our reanimation spells is going to be more useful. So we know they've got an Uro in hand. Surprised if they didn't cast it this turn. So they're just feeding the Uro off of the Grist. They have a Caracas, which makes Griselbrand a lot worse. And the Grist can kill the Archon. So they kind of got us coming and going a little bit here. That's the Uro we knew about. And they get themselves a card. And it was a land. They bap us for 1. So they didn't have a fast clock just yet, but they're going to play the Uro next turn. So it's going to ramp up pretty quick. Exhume. So this will put an Uro into play for our opponent. But it will give us an Archon of Cruelty or a Griselbrand. So I'm going to go and get ourselves a Griselbrand, I think. Reason for the Griselbrand is we're going to draw 14 cards from it. So this pops at 5, so I'll lose not a lot of life from it. So this is going to draw them a card, and then this is going to die because it didn't escape. And we're going to draw this and see if we can find any starting mana to work with. Okay, so we have... Okay, we're going to go again here. Okay, so this is more like it. So we can play this out. Tap for black. We can cast a Dark Ritual. We can cast another Dark Ritual. We can unmask ourselves, and we'll get rid of... an Exhume. And we'll get rid of this Semmer's Emissary. Then we'll grief our opponent, pitching this Thoughtseize, just to see the last card in our opponent's hand. It's a Jace. Goodbye, Jace. And then we are going to cast Animate Dead, targeting our Semmer's Emissary. And we're going to name... I think we name... How many creatures do they have in their graveyard? Just the 1. So we're going to name land... It's either land or Planeswalker here. Land keeps our Griselbrand in play. Planeswalker keeps any of our creatures in play. So maybe it's the Planeswalker here. And then we're going to cast Exhume. And I would like to get this Archon of Cruelty into play. So they draw their card. And then the Archon of Cruelty trigger happens because it goes active player, non-active player. So this will clean up the card in our opponent's hand anyway. What they discard? Discarded a Brainstorm. So I think that's a pretty good turn. I don't think we need to do anything else here. All right. So the Grist can't kill our guys. This can bounce our Griselbrand, but we are still bashing for a load of damage here. So they can play the Uro, which gives them another thing to sack to the Archon of Cruelty. Okay, they've just conceded. Also, they couldn't get anything back with this because they only had 2 other islands. Okay, so we managed to get that game. So not really 100% sure what sort of hate our opponent's going to be playing here. So Show and Tells basically always come in. The Semmer's Emissary seems like it's going to be better than Iona in this matchup, I would say. So counter spells are a thing we have to worry about, but that's what our discard is for. And do want to bring in some Wear Tear, Serenity type stuff against our opponents. I believe we do, but which one do we board in and how do we take things out for them? So we kind of need all of our graveyard hate. We're probably taking out we saw Prismatic Ending, so we probably want to get rid of them Animate Deads for the Show and Tells. And that gives us a single Serenity there. And then if we want to jigger around with any of our other numbers, We probably don't have to go super duper fast with the Lotus Petal. So we can probably trim one of these for another Serenity, just to have it. I think that's probably fine. We have 5 ways around Graveyard Hate that is like turn 0, but then we also have all the discard spells. So what does this hand do? Very little. Let's mulligan it. What does this hand do? This protects us against Leyline. It also gives us the ability to draw. Because our opponent's on a slow matchup, this feels like a good keep to me. We can get rid of our Polluted Delta. We're probably going to draw into more lands here. Famous last words, I know, but... Okay, they didn't start with the Leyline in play. They're probably relying on their Force of Wills to do them some work here. Okay, so we have an Exhume. So we're probably just looking at end of turn, Entomb, untap, Exhume. And if that doesn't work, we've got these 2 Faithless Lootings to reload with. Okay, so we might be getting this counterspelled. Sure, a Flusterstorm. That's fine. Let's go back to us, and then we're going to carry on with our Faithless Looting alternate plan that we came up with. Because of this Lotus Petal, we might be able to Exhume this turn as well. Not a massive fan of what we've got going on here. So we're probably getting rid of this Faithless Looting, and maybe this Petal, and then we Entomb end step. And then we hold this Grief in case we get to use that for something. So we kind of get to roll back the same play we did last turn. And we might be able to, if we draw a black card, we can Grief to make sure the way's clear first. Okay, a Misty Rainforest. So opponent's got a lot of mana open still. Let's see how this Entomb goes. Okay, it looks like they maybe have another counterspell here. They could also be fishing for it by casting a Brainstorm in response. Okay, it's just another Flusterstorm. Alrighty. Message received. Okay, so we're going to pass the turn and do the exact same thing again. And at some point, it's going to go through, and we're hopefully going to make a Griselbrand and draw a load of cards. And then we should be able to win with an extra 14 cards. So this is going to be a Ponder or a Brainstorm, I would imagine. A Ponder. Sure. Let's see if they shuffle or not. They did not shuffle their library. Okay, that means that our Entomb might not be resolving this turn. Try again. Okay, so now they're brainstorming in response, which means they probably don't have an answer immediately. So that's good news for us. Okay, Force of Will, pitching Baleful Strix. Okay, at some point we're going to force through a thing. So we can Grief and then get our Grief back with the Exhume here. And we can just strip our opponent's hand completely if we want to. I just don't know how good that's going to be. We're going to try it. We're going to Grief them anyway. Veil of Summer. Okay. So I don't really want to Exhume it this turn. So I think we are on the pass train here. We've done a pretty good job of grinding away our resources. I thought so. So we're going to lose our Show and Tell or our Exhume here. Okay, I took the Exhume. Okay, we have a Dark Ritual. So we can Dark Ritual into Faithless Looting if we want to. Or leave us with 1 card in hand. So that's not actually very good when we have a Show and Tell in our hand. So I'm going to wait until we've drawn another card and then do it because our opponent isn't pressuring our life tile. That way we can keep 2 cards, which could be Show and Tell and a Fatty. But we'll see what we draw here. A Griselbrand. Okay. But we also kind of want to land. So I think we're going to pass one more turn. Again, our opponent isn't pressuring us here. So this is just going to be an Endurance, I think. Yeah, so there's an Endurance. That's fine. So we can't do our play that we wanted to do with the Faithless Looting, which is a little bit annoying. But we just need to find a fetch land and then we can make Show and Tell. And then put in Griselbrand and then win the game off of Griselbrand. That's more or less what Griselbrand does when he comes into play. Let's have a look. It's not one of those. So now we can just Faithless Looting and see where it takes us. We got another Flusterstorm. 3 mana. A Force of Negation. Sure. Alright, our opponent's a very hateful deck. We've sort of seen a lot of their cards though, and it doesn't look like they have any dedicated Graveyard Hate outside of these Endurances. So we can reappraise our sideboarding for the final game if we go to a 3rd game. Like, again, we can still just draw a blue source here. A Grief. That doesn't do it. So we're just going to wait a bit longer, but it does mean that we can, if we draw a blue source, we can Grief first, and then we can cast Show and Tell. And then we can put Griselbrand in, and then we can do all the good things. The amount of cards we can draw is drastically decreasing as this goes on. They do get to put Force of Negation on top of their library, so we will definitely need to Grief them. But again, we have that covered. We just need a blue source. So one of our Lotus Petals, or any of our fetch lands, or our Underground Sea. All of these do the job. Okay, we have a Bloodstained Mire. So this turn we will cast this by exiling this. You cannot Force of Negation that one. Oh. The Veil of Summer off the top though. That's pretty good. Okay. So we can't actually play around the Force of Negation now. We'll just be giving it up if we do that. So what we need to do is find a piece of discard or a piece of reanimation for our Grief to lead the way. So we've got a few turns, but not many, because Endurance is clocking us. A Baleful Strix. Sure, that's just a redraw. We've always sort of been really, really close to getting them, but they just happen to have the additional thing. It's a little bit awkward. Looking forward to being on the play for the last game, if we do another game. But again, we're not very far away from winning this game. Dark Ritual. That's not one of the ones we need to. So they've got 2-turn clock now. And when our Griselbrand comes into play, we can't draw a card off of it, because we're only going to have a small amount of life. So we need to find an Unmask or a Grief. We can't find Reanimate anymore. So we need Unmask, Grief. Thoughtseize can do it, depending on if they counterspell our Dark Ritual, which would be the heads up play to do. They have drawn quite a few cards though, so they might have other permission for us to get through. Underground Sea. So what are we looking at here? A Serenity. That's not really the one, is it? So I guess we crack this. Hope our opponent makes a mistake and doesn't counterspell this. Seems very unlikely. Let's see. There it is. Sure, we can concede the game now. Okay, I felt we got a little bit unfortunate there, but I don't think we need these Serenities looking at how things panned out there. So what we can do is we can bring in some silences, or we can bring in a Lotus Petal back, or we can bring in these Chancellors to tax their counter spells early on. Quite like the Chancellors there. They're also just another thing that we can put in. I think that's fine. I don't think we need to do anything else. All right, we'll submit like this. Let me see what this hand looks like. This hand is a turn 1 Chancellor of the Annex into play, which is pretty good. I think we'll keep that. Turn 1 Chancellor should definitely annoy our opponent. Play this out. Play this out. Crack this. So we're probably going to use blue on our Lotus Petal. So we're just going to get Badlands here, because that's going to be better down the line, I think. So I think we go add some black mana, Dark Ritual. Our opponent does get to put a creature in here, if they have one, which could be the Baleful Strix, which would be annoying, but we'll see. I hope it's not the Baleful Strix. Okay, so they just put a Wasteland into play. Interesting. Sure. So this is just going to help them pay for their first spell when the time comes. But they've got 4 turns. Their 4-color deck playing Wasteland is something, that's for sure. Okay, so we might be able to get this Griselbrand into play this game as well. Now, they might Wasteland us because we didn't make a land drop. But that makes it harder for them to pay the Chancellor tax, because they have to pay 2 for their first spell, because we have the Chancellor in play as well as the first Chancellor trigger. Okay, so they're using this as their bait to get through the Chancellor trigger. Okay, now they're Wastelanding us. Bit rude, but fair enough. Okay, so we can play out our Lotus Petal. So they can Swords to Plowshares this. That should be a real problem for us. However, I suspect from the configuration they had in Game 2 that they boarded out all their plows and were just hoping to deal with our creatures from getting into play in the first place. Okay, they don't have black mana for the Baleful Strix yet. Archon of Cruelty. Let's have a little bash with this guy. So next turn they can put in an Endurance to block with. And then the turn after they might be able to play something like a Jace and bounce our creature. Okay, they didn't have it. So we won that match off of the back of the Chancellor in the end. Felt good. Like, I think we had to board in the Serenity, so we didn't know quite what our opponent was doing. But maybe we could have boarded in the Chancellors. We didn't really get a good look at our opponent's deck game 1. Alright, we are 2-2 going into the final round, so let's jam. Okay, so we've lost a die roll again, so that's all 5 die rolls I think we lost there. So this hand obviously doesn't have any mana, so we're going to throw it back. This is a weird hand. This hand makes double Grief on turn 1. I don't think that's good enough. I think we should mulligan. Okay, so if we keep 5 of these cards, we need Dark Ritual. So we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we actually need 6 of these cards if we keep this one. But what we can do is we can keep and throw these 2 back, and then we just need a black card or a mana source. Yeah, black card or a mana source. Okay, that's fine. Black card or a mana source when we get turn 2 Griselbrand. We hope our opponent doesn't discard us or have Thoughtseize on the play. A Tundra. So our opponent's probably going to have access to counter magic. So this might make it a little bit difficult for us to win this game. We might have to play a touch slower. A Thoughtseize would be a really good draw. A Polluted Delta. So that's one of the things we wanted. But because we can do everything all in one turn, I think we will just play out this Verdant Catacombs like this. We have an Archon of Cruelty. So I still don't think we need to go. I think we can wait and try and play around a counter spell. We need any discard effect addressed down. Okay, so our opponent is some sort of Stifle Naught deck. That's the impression I'm getting, at least. Unless this is just they're trying to draw a card, but I have to imagine that we're getting Stifle. Okay, Expressive Iteration. So maybe they're not a Stifle Naught deck. Although they don't know the top card with the Ponder, do they? No. So, interesting. Up to us. Another mana source. Does that change anything? I don't think it does. I think we just play out the mana source and hold. Like, at any point we get Griselbrand into play, we win the game. That's generally what that card does. We just need to make sure we actually get there. And we could just jam all our stuff and say, do you have a counter spell? But I think it's okay to wait here. If we were on the play and we could do a turn 1, then I would jam. But I don't think it's worth doing when it was turn 2 against a blue deck that's already cast a Ponder. Okay, Caracas. So that makes our Griselbrand worse. Noted. Another Archon of Cruelty. Right. So we can always draw a couple more times and then go to discard and put something in the graveyard. That way we can use our Unmask to mess with our opponent's hand instead. And even though they have a Caracas, I would still rather have the Griselbrand in play because drawing 14 cards should be enough to win a game of Magic the Gathering. Let's see. Opponent's gone to clean up. We discarded an array. So we can either play this land or we can draw and discard next turn. I think we should just play draw and discard. We can discard a Griselbrand. Alright, so we're getting Snapcaster Mage in amongst it as well. It probably looks quite weird from our opponent's side of the board. We've just sat here doing nothing. So this is going to impact the amount of cards we can draw potentially. And our life total starts taking a hit. Another Snapcaster Mage. Sure. It's going to be an expressive iteration. So our opponent's got all the resources in the world right now. Although they will have to go to cleanup. But I suppose they don't matter because they're sculpting so much. So now I think we are going to try and go for it next turn. And draw some cards with the Griselbrand. But first thing we do, we have to unmask our opponent. A Ponder, sure. We can only draw 7 cards with the Griselbrand. A Grief, okay. A Grief is a good one. We start off with the Grief, and we'll pitch this Archon of Cruelty. That gives us the option of putting the Archon of Cruelty into play. Dress Down. Dress Down is a good one. It means we get to keep our guy. But then what are we doing here? So we've got 4 mana, 5, 6, 7. So we're pretty close to actually just hard casting our guy. We could hard cast an Unmask this turn. I don't hate that as a play. Let's do that. Our opponent doesn't feel like a Daze deck either. Badlands and Swamp and probably another Badlands, I think. So we don't have any blue mana and we don't want to show in the blue mana if we can avoid it. Cast, target you. Black, 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 black. See if this resolves. We can see what we're up against. So we've seen a Swords to Plowshares on our opponent's discard pile here. And Endurance, sure. So this will just stay in, but it won't exile, won't shuffle the graveyard in because the Dress Down. So what are we working against here? Prismatic Ending, Force of Will, Minsk and Boo. So our opponent can hard cast the Force of Will next turn, but they can Minsk and Boo us, which is going to be a whole thing, isn't it? Is it going to be easier to beat Minsk and Boo or Force and Will? There's a genuine question there. Like, we can't actually draw cards with the Griselbrand, so I think we just have to take the Minsk and Boo here. I think that's probably the card that's going to beat us quicker. So our Grief can trade with a Snapcaster if we want it to, but then they can exhume the Snapcaster and get the plow back. So we're in a real spot of bother here. Our opponent has okay, they're just going to Prismatic Ending our thing. Sure, Prismatic Ending for 4, why not? Okie dokie. Oh no, they're just playing the Euro. My mistake. So we can't really... If we block on this, then they do get to do the plow. I think we just have to save ourselves damage here. This looks pretty awkward though. And then hope that we can try and put this Archon of Cruelty into play somehow. So next turn we can hardcast the Archon of Cruelty. But I don't know if we're going to get a next turn. This is us trying to get our Grief into play. If we'd have discarded the Archon of Cruelty instead of the Griselbrand, we would have been in a better spot. So maybe we were getting a bit too greedy, thinking we'd go off soon, and we should have just discarded that one. This has to be the Grief, because Griselbrand just gets bounced immediately. Okay, so all these Prismatic Endings. So they are just going to Prismatic Ending our guy here. So I guess we take the iteration and hope they don't see that they have the line to kill us. I suspect they will see the line, and we are just dead. Losing a lot of game ones with Reanimator today, which is not really how it's supposed to go. Okay, so they had the win wrapped up here, and they didn't take it, which is fascinating to me. So, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They had it both ways actually. They didn't need to Prismatic Ending. I think they could have done. Ignore me. All right, so our opponent is probably going to be similar to that last deck we played. So we're going to want these Show and Tells. Is Summer's Emissary going to be better? I think Summer's Emissary for instant is probably going to do quite a lot of work. I don't think we need Dismembers. I would like these Chancellors, please, for the counter spells. So we're probably getting rid of the Animate Deads in the face of Prismatic Ending. And then we're cutting probably an Unmask. That seems fine to me. I don't think our 4-color non-black deck can be playing Ley Lines. Now, I could be wrong. Certainly feels like a day where I could be wrong a lot. So let's see. What does this hand do? This hand makes a turn 1 Chancellor. That's got to be good, right? So keep this. Our opponent does get to put one of their creatures in if we do this, though. I think we probably get rid of the Grief because we can't use it on turn 1 because we need Dark Ritual and the Lotus Petal. And the Entomb is probably just going to be better moving forwards. So crack this. We're going to go and get ourselves a Badlands for the same reasons we did the last time we did this play. Play this one out. We're going to cast this. Then we're going to cast the... No, we want to do this afterwards in case our opponent puts in a Endurance. Oh, what am I doing? I'm doing the wrong thing here, aren't I? We're casting this. Alright. So we're doing this, putting the Chancellor in, and then we're going to put our Entomb in. Opponent has Force of Will blue card and then Force of Will blue card, then sure. It's a bit awkward. Okay, they had double Force of Will blue card. Less than ideal. I think we stick in a Griselbrand. Okay, so our opponent had pretty good hand there. Now, they are down a lot of resources, but so are we. Now, Reanimate does a lot for us here, but other than that, we're going to need to draw mana sources and other stuff. A Faithless Looting is pretty nice still. It can maybe draw us into something good, but we're not looking great right now because our opponent is just going to counter it their way back into the game, and we don't have that option. We'll play this out because a lot of our reanimation spells cost 2 mana, so we're going to play that one out, and let's see how we go. Expressive Iteration, sure. So our opponent is pulling quite far ahead now. An Entomb. We don't really want to fire that off yet, so I think we just pass the turn. Okay, we're staring at each other here. Faithless Looting. I will cast this one though. How many forces in your deck? Surgical Extraction on that guy. Sure. Not great for us there. We're not going to be able to Griselbrand our opponent. But we do have a chance to discard. And we have an Entomb to go and get something else. Not really feeling this one. We have options of what to keep here. We can keep the Chancellor in hand and bin off these two. But we kind of want the land for next turn anyway. So I guess we're putting back Chancellor and Grief here. And then, do you play this up now? Yes, I think so. And next turn we can flash back our Faithless Looting. We can probably Entomb at our opponent's end step and get the Archon of Cruelty in there. I think that's just the better way of pulling ahead in this game, is the Archon here. We could get the Semmer's Emissary. I think we just want the one that draws us cards though. Little baby Griselbrand. Oh, they got Endurance as well? Jesus Christ. Okay, so our opponent has had, I would say, a top 5% draw against us. We could still win this game though. We've just drawn another Entomb, so Jesus Christ. Okay, let's see how we go. Life from Malone, sure. You can have 3 cards I don't really care about. Yep, you're going to bash us with that. So we definitely cast this now because we also want to take one of the things out of the deck that we can draw, so we don't really want to draw an Archon of Cruelty. So this way, we're less likely to draw an Archon of Cruelty. Oh my god, have you got something else? This guy. Jesus. Wowzers, Bowsers. Okay, so this is looking like a top 1% of hands that our opponent could have drawn, I think, at this point. Yikes. We don't have a lot of ways of winning the game left in our deck now. Probably need to keep that in hand for the purposes of the Faithless Lootings. Show and tell. Okay, so we need a creature, but then we can at least get our guy in play if we draw one. Now, there's not many left in the deck. We're basically looking for Semmer's Emissary and the other Chancellor. So we've basically got 2 cards to draw here. And they're putting Expressive Iteration back on top. Yikes, indeed. So these sorts of control decks are sort of fallen out of the meta quite a bit recently. But they have a lot of tools. So this is like a hot bant deck. Sure, you can have a Wasteland as well. It's so greedy, these 4-colour decks with Wastelands, but it seems to be doing A-OK for them. Alright, let's have a look. Another show and tell. I guess we'll play this out. We got one more draw step. The only problem is we can't crack our Marsh Flats. So if they have Minskamboo, we're dead here. Sure, we are dead. Yep, we are done here. So we went 2 and 3 with this deck list. Now, we did get hit by some variants in this league that certainly wasn't great. So we lost every single die roll, which is certainly a problem with this deck. And like one of the rounds we lost the die roll, we got Thoughtseize on turn 1. And another one of the rounds, we got Thoughtseize on turn 1. So if we win the die rolls, that's completely flipped, and we Thoughtseize our opponent on turn 1 and get to do our stuff. So That's definitely a little bit unlucky. And also our opponent's hand in the final game was probably the single greatest anti-reanimator hand I've ever played with or against. It felt incredibly brutal. They just had literally everything. So I can't feel too bad about that. But it should be noted that these sorts of problems with variants is one of the issues with playing this deck. So this deck is not immune to variants, and in fact, because your hands tend to have like a key thing, it's very weak to specific target discard usually, which is what cost us 2 of the rounds. And just not winning the die roll, the power of being able to deploy like big threats on turn 1 or 2 is massively diminished on the draw in a lot of ways, because your opponents can have up Brainstorm to dig for the specific answers, or counter spells, or Veil of Summers to mess with your discard, so you can't even get through that way. So there's definitely a real cost of losing die rolls that is built into this deck in a way. So I think we were unfortunate to go 2-3, but I think this speaks to the wider problems with Reanimator in the current meta. So there's a reason it's gone from the number 2 deck in the format to like the number 6 deck now. It is still explosive, and you know, if you run hot, you're probably going to smash all of your opponents in, because what you're doing is intrinsically very, very strong. It's a bit like Dark Depths, where making a thing on like turn 1 or 2 that kills your opponent pretty much there and then is a very powerful thing to do. Now, we are so easily disrupted, but we also have a lot of our own disruption. But I think we are unfavoured against some of the other combo decks in the field, like Doomsday, because they have discard, they have counter spells, they have a clock that is very quick. They also have the ability to like personal tutor things on top of their library, which we can't interact with. And then when they cast a Doomsday, we can't really interact with their library, we just have to kill them. So if they can just keep us off balance and delay us for a turn, that's a real issue for us. Now, we did also mulligan quite a lot in this league, which is something that this deck is kind of want to do, because we have a very specific game plan we're trying to execute. We need to mulligan a fair bit. So I'm not really saying that we got unlucky. Like, we didn't really get to keep very many 7s, so I guess we got a little bit unfortunate there. But this deck is supposed to mulligan, like, I think on average you're mulliganing at least once a game, as you know, as the stats tend to work out roughly. So I just think the nature of this deck is just weaker to some of these combo-y decks, and also we didn't play against the initiative, so it'll be interesting to see how that fares. I think, again, if you lose a die roll against initiative, they can probably beat you. You know, they have Caracas for your Griselbrand. They have lots and lots of removal they can use, and they can prison you out with things like Chalice as well if they're on the play, or the Archon of Emeria, which really slows down your game plan. And they also do have the disruptive creatures in Peacekeeper and the Paolo card that I can't remember the name of, that discards you but puts into exile. So I think it's not in a great spot right now, the old Reanimator deck. I think maybe playing some sort of blue-black Reanimator might be a better shout, because Force of Will is probably better than it's been in the format for a long time, actually. I think Force of Will is at one of its strongest, mainly because the initiative deck is like one of the big 2 decks in the format right now. And Force of Willing, the first play that an initiative deck makes, is often enough to buy you time to get into the game. So maybe some sort of blue-black Reanimator would be the way to go. Now, quite how you're fitting in all your various bits and pieces, I don't know, but maybe have a think and come back to that one, or some sort of Grixis Reanimator. There's a lot of options of things we could possibly do. So I'm going to have a little think and maybe come back to a different sort of Reanimator shell that's kind of got a different approach to matchups, really. But like, this deck is still fine, and if you run well, you know, you're going to crush a load of leagues. But I think the average performance of Reanimator has now dropped substantially to the point where I don't really think this is where you want to be in the meta right now. But, you know, there is a lot of fun to playing massive creatures into play super early. Like, when we had that turn where we like put 3 creatures into play out of nowhere, and that felt really good. I'm not 100% convinced this is the ideal sideboard. Feel like we probably wanted some sort of graveyard hate. We didn't have any graveyard hate, and we could have done with some against the Reanimator matchup, like some Fairy Macabres type things. We've obviously got some different tools, but again, Reanimator is dropping in the format right now, so having less Reanimator hate makes sense. I think if you want to play a turn 1 combo deck in this format, I personally think the best turn 1 combo deck is probably Oops All Spells at the moment. I think that is where you want to be in your turn 1 combo decks. The Epic Storm is pretty good, but it's not always a turn 1 combo deck because you're trying to just relay over and over again usually, and that can get a little bit unstuck in the face of initiative and all the prison paces they play, because there's quite a few Mindbreak traps floating around right now. So I don't really have much more to say about Reanimator. It feels like it's just not really there as a deck right now, but that doesn't mean that it can't come back, because what it's doing is intrinsically powerful and you can still play it and run well and do well with it. It's just not something that I would choose for a tournament. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about this. Maybe this should be, maybe Chancellor's main deck should come back again. That was a thing that was there for a while. Maybe that's where we need to be now if we want to play this deck. I'm not really sure. I'm not a Reanimator expert. I've played it a tiny little bit. But yeah, okay, so we're done. I hope you enjoyed that. This was a request from one of my subscribers. So I hope that particular subscriber was happy with this. I know our record wasn't great, but we showcased a few interesting lines, especially when we had to do the reanimate from our opponent's graveyard. So we showed some of the more... we also had the show and tell plans. We had, you know, a fair bit more going on instead of just like playing out the big fatties on turn 1. And we also kind of showed one of the weaknesses of the deck, which I think is really important to showcase. And I guess why not let a content creator show you those weaknesses instead of wasting your own play points, which is fair enough, I guess. All right, we are done for now. If you're still here, like, comment, subscribe, do these things. Share my content too, that really helps. All right, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.